Welcome to the Contemporary South Asia podcast, the audio companion to the journal Contemporary South Asia, published by Taylor and Francis. Each episode, we engage with scholarship that examines the politics, societies, and cultures of South Asia in their global and historical contexts. Through conversations with authors and experts, we highlight key debates, emerging research, and critical perspectives that shape interdisciplinary understandings of the region today. Our aim is to extend the dialogue beyond the page, opening the journal's work to a wider audience of scholars, students, and interested listeners. My name is Dr. Thomas Chambers. I'm an Associate Professor of Social and Cultural Anthropology at Oxford Brookes University, and also the editor of Contemporary South Asia. My guest today is Dr. Mudassar Munir, and our discussion centres on his recent article, The State Through Intermediaries, Dhara Bandi, Mediation and the Politics of Survival in Punjab, Pakistan, that was published in Contemporary South Asia this year in volume 34, issue 1. Mudassar is a social anthropologist whose research focuses on the state, governance and environmental crisis in South Asia and beyond. He completed his PhD studying everyday practices and representations of the state in rural Pakistan, and it's this research that the article focuses on. His more recent work has expanded this to explore how floods and water disasters shape state-making, legitimacy, and citizen expectations across both the global north and south, including through a postdoctoral fellowship at the German Maritime Museum in Bremerhaven. Mudassar Munir, a very warm welcome to the Contemporary South Asia podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm quite excited.
A fascinating article that I really enjoyed reading, and that actually for me was particularly enjoyable because it connects to some of my own work in North India around sort of mediation and the digitization of the state and things like this. So we're in sort of the rural kind of Punjabi context here. I wonder if you could start, before we kind of get into some of the detail of the article, just sort of setting the scene a little bit for listeners. You know, where are we? What kind of space is this? You know, if it's particular villages, even just a little bit of, sort of detail about these localities and so on and so on.
Sure. So Bhi Nagar, that's the name of the village. That's basically a pseudonym, by the way. And I changed the name to protect people's privacy. And the village where I did my fieldwork is in central Punjab. As you know, Punjab is the largest and most populous province in Pakistan. The province is mostly flat, agricultural, dusty in the summer, and cold, and gets foggy and smoggy in some parts in the winter, and fields of wheat and sugar cane stretching out as far as you can see. There are roads of all sizes, shops of all sizes, cars, and lots of motorbikes everywhere. Everywhere, the sound of the call to prayer 5 times a day. And villages, hundreds and hundreds of villages, each one with its own social world, its own hierarchical structure, its own politics. So Bhi Nagar is one of those villages. It's not remote. It's not cut off from the world. People have smartphones. They watch television. They follow national politics. And if you start asking people about the state, you find out that the state, as most people imagine it, is largely absent, or at least it feels absent. Think about what the state is supposed to be or supposed to do. It's supposed to deliver services. It provides security. It issues documents, build roads, runs schools, staff hospitals. But in Bhi Nagar, these things exist technically. For instance, there's a school, there's a health facility, there's a union council office. There's also a police station, the Thana. But here's the thing: these institutions in the lives of ordinary villagers um, are experienced as distant, intimidating, confusing, sometimes even hostile. It's not like you just walk into the thana and expect to be helped. You do not just go to the union council office and walk out with your paperwork. Um, I'll explain more about that later. Talking about the state in the village because it's very important. Bhi Nagar sits within a wider administrative geography of the country. So for bigger things, for instance, land disputes, court cases, hospital treatment, major bureaucratic processes, people go to the nearby town. So I would say that's the village. So that's the area where I did my PhD fieldwork in 2019 and 2020. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Does it answer your question? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really sets the scene, for a listener. I mean, some of our listeners, of course, may be familiar with the Punjab or that kind of region. Certainly someone who does a lot of work in Uttar Pradesh, a lot of the sort of description of the landscape and so on is very familiar for me. And also this sort of sense, I suppose, I mean, even for listeners perhaps who work elsewhere in the world, who aren't necessarily dealing with the South Asian context, but anyone sort of working on the state or sort of familiar with the literatures around, people's state dynamics and claim making and weighting and these sorts of things, that kind of opaqueness of bureaucracy or the the forms of kind of power even that bureaucracy can exert over people in particular ways are very much a part of those kind of narratives. Your article particularly sort of focuses in on certain local actors, and there's these three characters, I assume again the pseudonyms, but there's these three characters that you kind of introduce who all kind of fulfill these sort of they're quite influential actors, but their influence, I suppose, lies in that sort of ability to mediate that space between. And I wonder if you could then sort of introduce a little bit for us these characters and a little bit about them.
But Thomas, before I say before I talk more about those actors, let me just take a step back and
Sure.
and say something why basically I decided to write this article and what this article is about. So this article didn't begin at a desk. It didn't begin with a theory or research questions. It began in a village, in a baithak. For those who do not know what a baithak is, it's basically a Punjabi or Urdu term to describe a sitting room or a space where guests are received, especially male guests. So I was doing my PhD fieldwork, as I said, in 2019 and 2020 as part of my PhD. I remember sitting in a baithak in the village, watching people come and go, doing what ethnographers do, watching the way the village life worked. And I kept noticing something that didn't quite fit the way I had been trained to think about the state, about governance, about politics, about village politics generally, because everything I had read, the textbook, the academic literature, they all talk about the state in terms of institutions, laws, bureaucracies, formal structures. The state as a thing, a fixed top-down thing. But what I was seeing in front of me was something completely different. I was seeing the state happening through people, through relationships, through a man sitting in a room, listening to people's grievances, making phone calls, attending funerals, posting photos on Facebook. And I thought nobody is really writing about this. Nobody's documenting this specific everyday relational, work. So that is clearly holding governance together in this place, holding the state together, even the village together, I would say. So that's when I know I had something worth writing. And just briefly, what this paper is about. This paper is about a space, a very specific space, the space in between, the space that exists between ordinary people and the state. In Western democratic traditions, we call that space civil society. But in the global south, where majority of the world's population live, um, the concept of civil society does not work. It doesn't hold. Thomas, I'm sure you know that. You also study South Asia. Um, so scholars who have tried, to find better words, better frameworks, better ways of describing this space that exists between ordinary people and the state in countries of the global south. Partha Chatterjee, for instance, calls it political society. Kristen Lund calls this space twilight institution. Javier Oyaro calls this space gray zones of politics. So the question I had was, who fills that space in rural areas of Punjab, that space between the state and ordinary people, and who works in this space every single day? And I argue in the paper, this space in rural Punjab is full of people, full of relationships, full of labor. And I also argue in the paper that in rural Punjab, one of the most important institution living in that space is Dhara Bandi. So this paper is about Dhara Bandi, and this paper is also about the labor of different political actors who work in this in-between space, who through their day-to-day labor make the state visible in places like Bhi Nagar, who hold governance together in rural areas of Pakistani Punjab, who also through their everyday labor connect the village life with the province, with the nation. So so that's the paper is about. And to back to your question, so again, as I said, this paper is about Dhara Bandi, and I think it's also important we describe, what the Dhara Bandi is, because as I said, there are those political figures. To understand them, it's very important to understand the concept of Dhara Bandi. So Dhara Bandi is a Punjabi term, and at the most basic level, Dhara Bandi refers to factional alignment. And the word Dhara, it means a side, a camp, or a political strain. And the word Bandi, it means the act of organizing around that side. So Dhara Bandi describes the process through which people come together. They align themselves with the specific political camp or with a specific political leader. And every Dhara, every faction revolves around a central figure. And those figures are always men. There could be a woman, but I guess it's very rare. And the village where I did my field work, there were only men leading different political factions, different dharas. And they act as organizer, as mediators, as representatives of the faction. They are the social anchors of their respective dhara. So in Bhi Nagar, during my field work, you had Fida Gujjar. These are again, all the names are pseudonyms. Fida Gujjar, Imtiaz Nambardar on one side, they were with the ruling party at the time, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan's party, and on the other side you had Chaudhry Suleiman. He was with the opposition party in Punjab at that time, Pakistan Muslim League, Nawaz. And these factions, they are not just about elections. That's the thing people, I think, get wrong when they study about them. And here I am thinking about the work of Shandana Mohammed. I argue in the paper that Dhara Bandi is not something that switches on every 5 years when there is a vote and then disappear. I argue that Dhara Bandi, it's alive every single day, in every single interaction. Who you sit with at a wedding, whose baithak you go to after evening prayers, who you call when you are in trouble. All of that constantly, continuously is Dhara Bandi in action. And a lot of existing ethnographic work on Punjab. Here I'm thinking about the work of Andrew Wilder, Nicholas Martin, Meher Latif, to name a few. For them, it's a patron-client politics. So the interesting stuff of Pakistani politics. Of course, there's an element of that, but but I saw in the field how roads and streets get paved in neighborhoods loyal to the faction in power. Drains get fixed when where the supporters live. And if you are on the wrong side, your streets remain broken. Your paperwork gets delayed, and you are at the back of the queue. So that's real. Patron-client politics is real, but this is the important bit. Dhara Bandi does something else as well, something that gets completely missed if you study it within the framework of patron-client frameworks. And one of the arguments I make in the paper is that Dhara Bandi plays an important role in organizing village life. So Dhara Bandi is not simply about politics during elections. It's a social institutions that structure everyday relationships in the village. It gives people a framework, a sense of where they belong, who they stand with in everyday life. It gives people a route into the state. Dhara Bandi also provides a way of getting things done: birth certificate, ID cards, land papers. Because without your faction, without your Dhara, if you go to lower courts, you go to the police station, you get nothing done. I remember one villager told me exactly that. He said, without the support of your Dhara, without the support of your local leader, we just hit a wall. So this whole system, the sides, the loyalties, the who knows who, that is Dhara Bandi. And I argue that Dhara Bandi is what quietly keeps things going in rural Punjab, and it keeps governance alive. And in a lot of places, it keeps the state alive. So yeah, I hope, I know it was a very long question because there were a lot of things, I wanted to clarify, because these are important concepts. Yeah. Yeah. We could talk more, yeah, as we move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a context that I guess I find particularly fascinating. Having done quite a lot around these kinds of players as well, these kind of intermediary kind of actors who are sort of uh, I guess kind of in a way bridge building, but also embedded, of course, in social relations, in forms of obligation that might be to kin, to family, but also to neighbors, to friends, and in of course then forms of factionalization, right? Two families fall out, and suddenly if the local NATO or Pradhan or whatever is in one faction, that has implications for the other, right? These sorts of things are familiar dynamics, and you describe, of course, this sort of Dhara Bandi type space. And I think this idea of, treating this as a space actually is something I've done as well in my own work. I think it's really sort of a, useful conceptual framework to sort of, think about this space of mediation, this space in which these sorts of things play out. And, concepts, I guess, like Safarish come in here as well, and other sort of dynamics that might be in play. So I wonder if you could, tell me a little bit more then about these three actors. I mean, you sort of described them as sort of, broadly sitting within two factions. One aligned with Imran Khan's party. And at the time of your field work, am I right in thinking that Imran Khan was still in post at that time? And
Exactly. He was
not
prime minister.
familiar with the Pakistani context, that's very different now. Sits in a jail cell, and the state are trying to erase his memory, I suppose, even. But in the case of someone like Imran Khan, that's of course not possible. His fame is so pervasive. But nonetheless, here we have this interesting sort of dynamics. I wonder if you could actually tell me a little bit about the sort of day to day, in terms of what these players actually do. What forms of mediation do they actually undertake? In a quite kind of physical or material sense of that.
Sure. So, we understand now what Dhara Bandi is. So the next important question, of course, is how does it hold together? And because Dhara Bandi, and this is something I also emphasize strongly in the paper, is not stable, and it's not a fixed thing that is just there maintaining itself automatically. No, it's fragile, constantly fragile, and always at risk of fracturing. And a lot of things in the village can break affection, as I guess briefly you mentioned. Uh, for instance, a land dispute between two families, a question of honor, a funeral where a person didn't show up, a family wedding where a person didn't show up. Any of these things can break affection, can pull someone away, shift their loyalty, move them to the other side. And so the job of the leader of the faction, the core of his labor, is to prevent that from happening every single day, without stopping. And this is what I mean when I talk in the paper about the labor of intermediaries to maintain Dhara Bandi. And the work they do, it's not dramatic, it's not spectacular, it's quiet, it's relentless, it's exhausting. And the work they do, it happens across multiple spaces simultaneously. The first space is the bathak, the Dharas. In Bhi Nagar, those bathaks and those Dharas, again, Dhara is similar to bathak, again, it's a space where people host guests, especially male guests. So bathaks and Dharas are something very significant in Bhi Nagar, especially bathaks and Dharas associated with intermediaries in the village. Those bathaks, those Dharas, they are what I call theaters of authority. These are the primary sites where Dhara Bandi is performed, tested, reproduced. Think about this scene. One evening, I am sitting in Chaudhry Suleiman's bathak, and after the evening prayer, men start coming in one by one. Some have come because they need something, a form or an advice about a document, but most of them have just come to sit in, to be there, to be present. And that act of presence, just showing up, just being in that room, is itself a performance of loyalty, a quiet affirmation that I'm in your dara, I'm in your camp, I'm with you. And Chaudhry Suleiman, the faction leader, he greets every single person individually. He remembers what they told him last time. He asks about their family, their children. So nothing spectacular is happening. There is just tea, people are smoking hookah, and Suleiman is listening to everyone continuously. He's nodding. So that's the labor of Dhara Bandi maintenance, because what Chaudhry Suleiman is doing through interaction in his bathak, through offering tea to everyone, is building and reinforcing trust. And this trust, this relational trust, this personal trust is the currency, is the fuel that Dhara Bandi runs on. And at the same time, he's building something else. He's building authority. Authority in places like Bhi Nagar is gained through repeated and attentive presence. And when these expectations are not met, when the intermediary fails to show up, fails to remember people's names, fails to remember people's requests, fails to act, fails to offer tea, fails to offer bathak or dharas, loyalty begins to fade. And that's why the labor never stops. And then there are weddings, there are funerals, there are sports tournaments, there are community events, where intermediaries labor is also very, very, very much visible. So when a local political leader attends a wedding, he's not just attending a wedding. When he sponsors a local sports tournament, he's not just sponsoring a tournament. These are basically acts of political investments. Every funeral they attend to reinforce their political bond. Every wedding they attend is basically to confirm their loyalty. Every sporting event supported by them is a public statement that we are here, we care, we see you, we are your people. But the regularity of it matters enormously. It's not just to show up once. You have to show up every time, because the moment you do not, the moment people notice that you were not at their funeral or that you were not there at their wedding, this is when the fracture in your dara begins. And that's when someone starts thinking, maybe I should, baby should be in the other dara or in the other camp. So the labor is constant every day without pause. Elections and votes are a distant benefits. They come every few years. But the work of maintaining Dhara Bandi, it never stops. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this labor has moved online. And these intermediaries have understood something very important. They have understood that visibility is not just a physical thing anymore. It's also digital. So they have taken the labor of Dhara Bandi into the digital sphere, into the digital realm. And they post photos of themselves at weddings. They post photos standing next to police officers, bureaucrats, high level politicians, broadcasting their connections, their reach, their ability to navigate the formal system. So they broadcast this to everyone scrolling through their phones in the village. And what the digital space does crucially is archive the labor, because the bathak gathering happens once and then they are gone. The wedding is attended and then it's over. But the Facebook post stays, and it sits there. It's visible. It's searchable. It's permanent record of presence, of connection, of authority. So all of this, the bathak, the weddings and funerals, the Facebook posts, all of it is labor, continuous, relational, morally grounded labor, um, to maintain Dhara Bandi. All this to keep the faction together. So yeah, this is their work. This is their labor, and it's continuous. It's every day, yeah, and it never stops. Yeah, I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, and again, this these kind of changes in the materiality, I suppose,
Yeah.
of spaces of mediation, that's intersected, as you say, by new technologies and so on. I guess, in some of my own research, I've looked at a slightly different way, looking at, the ways in which the digitization of the state, rather than the digitization of kind of, as you describe, this kind of archiving of the role of these intermediaries and the sort of presence of these intermediaries and their actions and so on, and the distribution and sort of visibility of their actions. But instead, I guess I've looked a little bit more at the digitization of the state and the impact that has on these kinds of intermediaries, who are now having to shift to interacting with a more digital materiality vis-a-vis the
Mm-hmm.
state, rather than through sort of personal connections with bureaucrats and so on and so on. And this is really fascinating. I guess as well here, you're very much engaged with that kind of sense of the everyday state. That the state is not just about the door of the government office, but actually this permeates well beyond. The state permeates well beyond that. And of course, we've had all sorts of ethnographic literature that's kind of done this in different parts of the world in different ways, whether that be following this sort of the state through intermediaries or through documents and cards and paperwork, even into people's pockets, and all sorts of different sorts of uh, 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 blurred boundaries, I guess, to use Akhil Gupta's kind of terminology,
Yeah.
around this. So I'm curious to ask you a bit then. I mean, without wanting to ask you to put a defining line on it, do you see a kind of end of the state, or is the state really truly everywhere in spatial terms?
Um, so we were talking about different spaces, for instance, and we were looking at where basically we could see the work political leaders, for instance, too. So there are different spaces. So similarly, there is another space. Yeah, I think this is how I would like to answer your question. So there is another space where their labor is also equally important, and the labor they perform in that space is to maintain their faction. And um, and and I call this space the arena of state making. And in this space, the state is not imposed from above, um, and but the state is pulled down. That's how I see. Um, dragged into the village, through competition, through faction, constantly trying to prove, I'm the one who brought the state to you. I'm the one who made it real. I'm your link. Chaudhry Suleiman, Fida Gujjar, they are constantly competing for followers, for loyalty, for influence, and that competition means that both of them are constantly working, constantly performing, constantly trying to demonstrate to villagers, um, I'm the one who can get things done. I'm the one, with the connections. I'm the one who will show up for you, for instance. Um, and what that produces, I argue in the paper, is more visibility of the state. because when identity documentation team or a polio team or another government scheme comes to the village, both Chaudhry Suleiman and Fida Gujar, they are racing to be the one who announce it first. Both of them are posting on Facebook. Both of them are telling their followers, "Come to my place. Um, I have organized this. I have made this happen." Um, and so more people find out, more people show up, more people get their ID cards, more people get polio drops. So this competition, this is how I see. So this competition between intermediaries actually drives states, I would say, state services deeper into the village. Um, and this connection, this basically connects to the, I would say, to the broader argument I make about how you know how villagers actually experience the state. And I guess your question was, if I understood correctly, was also about this. Um, because what my fieldwork shows is that the state is not experienced as a set of distant institution. It is experienced relationally. It is experienced, in the baithaks, in the Dharas, and it is experienced through different political actors who sits with you and explains what to do and what forms to fill in. Um, and people experience the state through faction leaders' Facebook posts that tells you that an identity documentation team or a polio team is coming tomorrow. So governance in Bhi Nagar, it's not just confined to bureaucratic offices. I would say it's embedded in everyday social life. Um, and the competition between intermediaries, it's not, it does not undermine the state. Actually, it makes the state more present, more visible, more alive. So that's how I see the phenomena of the state, in places like Bhi Nagar.
Yeah, fascinating. I wonder if I could draw you into one of your sort of own empirical examples, actually, just to sort of talk us through,
Yeah.
in a very descriptive way, the a particular process that played out here. At one point in the article, you talk about this sort of birth certificate case, Mohammed Safi's kind of experience of trying to obtain this birth certificate for his son for many, many months. And it's a familiar story for anyone who does sort of work on people's state interactions in South Asia. And then I think it's Fida Gujar who intervenes and says, okay, all right, I'll do this for you. And could you just talk us through that particular, sort of, in a very descriptive sense, the particular process that Mohammed Safi experiences and how what that sort of tells us?
So yeah, as I said, you know, um, so there's a kind of there are two factions, and they want to do something, for the community, and they want to announce, as quickly as possible, what's happening. So similarly, there was one day there was the identity documentation team was coming to the village, and Chaudhry Suleiman put this on his Facebook, and his followers come to his place. So there's this man. He doesn't know anything, how to basically what to do, and they were, and he didn't have, like, all the documents you needed to get, the ID card. So so Chaudhry Suleiman was there. He takes care of everything, for instance, and yeah, he says, like, yeah, I'm here. Don't worry about those documents, and let me deal, with them. So yeah, so this is how, not just this. There are so many other examples. So this is how, um, for instance, they intervene, and they try to, help their followers. Yeah, because yeah, they care about the faction, they care about their camp. Yeah.
And I wonder as well if you could tell us a little bit about some of the sort of, inequalities, I suppose, that are embedded within that system. And again, maybe drawing on some empirical examples, because, the state itself, of course, can be very inaccessible and can reproduce all sorts of inequalities and marginalities and so on. But I guess also, if we've got this very socially embedded, kind of space of mediation, could you tease out for us some of the specific ways in which that might, reproduce certain inequalities vis-a-vis
Yeah.
access, claim making and so on, precisely because it's reliant on these kind of embedded relationships with intermediaries?
Yeah. It's a very good question, and that's a problem, and that's a criticism of the concept of political society, the Bhatt Chatterjee's concepts, because they say in this space, for instance, there's a lot of patronage, there are a lot of inequalities, yeah, and that's true, um, and that's why there's a lot of literature. They see intermediaries, brokers, fixers, and they see them, as something um, like kind of a symptom of dysfunction. Um, and for them, it's an evidence of corruption. It's an evidence of patronage, of a state that's not working properly. And yet, I would say, yeah, that's real, and there are definitely inequalities produced by this kind of system. But at the same time, I would say, intermediaries at the same time are also, the reason governance basically functions in places like Bhi Nagar. Um, so they are not just, this is how I see them, they are not just parasites on the state. I would say they are in many ways, the state. So that's how I see. Yeah, of course, I totally agree with you. This system, not just, I mean, they are part of this system, but this system, the system Bhatt called political society, yeah, in this system there are a lot of inequalities, and there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of criminalities, also we see. But at the same time, as I said, in a lot of places, these fixers, brokers, whatever we want to call them, they are the reasons, governance functions at all in places like, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that sort of ambivalence then is really important here. That um, and I guess in a way as well, when we think about quite normative kind of constructions of corruption, for example, when we look at actual practices in places like Pakistan, India, wherever it might be in various parts of the world, then really these kinds of activities take place within a kind of moral continuum, I guess, where
Yeah.
they can be seen actually as fulfilling obligation, as fulfilling your duty, all sorts of different things, as well as perhaps something that's more exclusionary and interplays in these ways as well. It's really fascinating, to get a real sense of the context in which you've done this really really interesting work. I was wondering if I could turn a little bit to your sort of place as well, because you've situated this, of course, as an ethnography, and I think some of our listeners will probably be familiar with what it means to do ethnography. Some may not. So we're talking here, of course, about kind of quite long term embedded kind of field work. So I wonder if you could just sort of give listeners a little bit of a sense of how you actually carried out the research,
Yeah,
the duration of the research, the form it took, and so on.
sure. So as I at the beginning, I did the field work as part of my PhD, and it was in 2019, 2020. And so in the village, so my typical day in the field was wake up, drink tea, sit with people, drink more tea, listen, watch, try not to ask too many questions. Um, and tea was a central part of my methodology, I would say, because in Punjabi culture, hospitality is everything. You do not just walk into someone's place and start asking questions. You sit, you accept the tea, you let the conversation find its own rhythm, and that takes time. In the beginning, I remember I was just present, going to the bathak in the evening, sitting in the daras, visiting the barber shop, walking through the market, just being there. And slowly, very slowly, people started talking to me comfortably, forgetting, almost that I was there to study them. And that's when, the real field work begins. Um, I should say something important here. I'm a Punjabi myself. I grew up in Pakistan. I speak the language. I understand the culture from the inside. But I also had education. I studied in Lahore. I studied in Islamabad, and then in Europe for my PhD. So I occupied this strange double, I would say, position. Familiar enough to be trusted, but different enough to notice things that people who grew up there might take for granted. So I think that tension, that insider outsider position was really useful because I could sit in baithaks and feel completely at home, but at the same time watch what was happening with a kind of analytical distance. So that's how all the stories that I collected as part of research is as part of this research. Yeah, yeah. That's how I spent my time there. That's how I collected all those stories. And then those stories helped me to write this paper, I would say. Yeah.
Mm. I mean, you've kind of outlined your own positionality, of course, here as
Yeah.
a Punjabi, but also as a Pakistani Punjabi, but also with obviously an educational background that perhaps set you somewhat apart from so it's that sort of emic, but also I guess with an ethics side to the research as well. I also wondered how sort of in a way how your gendered positionality came in here, and in that sense as well. Then I wonder how women and the experiences of women come into play, and if
Yeah.
that was something you were able to sort of explore, and if so, how, and how did that maybe open up? I mean, for people not familiar perhaps with the Dhara kind of context, then usually there is the curtain and women are behind the curtain and maybe tea gets passed out, but then maybe all you see if you're a
Yeah.
guest. But certainly I found in my own field work, with time, you'd get that sort of rearticulation of your positionality as oh you're like part of the family, and at that point suddenly this sort of curtain falls, so to speak, and you would start to get much more intermingled into these sorts of gendered spaces. And I just wonder
Yeah.
if that's something that happened in the context of your research, and also then to ask you to expand a little bit on the sort of empirical descriptive material you may have around kind of women's experience of navigating these kind of informalized structures of mediation.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the limitation. For instance, I could not meet women in the field, for instance, because of the cultural norm of the area. So the data I have, it only came from men. Yeah, that's I would say whoever reads my paper, they should keep that in their mind. Uh, yeah, it's, the data I have it just came from men. Yeah, I could not meet a woman in the field.
In that sort of basis, then I mean, obviously, your male informants, whether that be the intermediaries themselves or others, did any of them sort of discuss, perhaps, interactions with women, around kind of documents, paper, these kinds of things? I
Yeah.
mean, just to give you an example, one of the concerns that was expressed quite often by men, for example, in the context of sort of fieldwork that echoes your context that I've done in India, which was primarily in a Muslim, kind of neighborhood, a minority, therefore also, a minority community in India, was the concern about handing over pictures of female relatives to
Mm.
primarily Hindu bureaucrats, and the question of them, well, what happens to this picture? Is it circulated? Is it put on the internet? Is it misused? These kinds of concerns were there. So I just wonder how, okay, obviously it was a very gendered kind of fieldwork experience, but how those kinds of, gendered dimensions kind of flowed through the male-dominated spaces that you were engaged.
Yeah. 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 This is again. I struggle a lot, with this question when I was in the field. Because I mean, I tried my best. I wanted to meet, for instance, also people from all genders. But it was not possible for me because as a male researcher, to access women's spaces, to sit with women, to have informal chat with them, and to observe their everyday lives. Of course, also they also interact with the state. What I saw there and the places I went to, for instance, I mentioned the Union Council. Um, I mean, I didn't see them coming to those places, for instance, on their own. They would come, with the male member. Same, the hospital there in the village, it was the same there. So and 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 there were some, for instance, people and who tried to help me. Even then, they could not help me, and they struggled a lot. They were saying, they due to the cultural norms here, for instance, it won't be possible, for instance, to reach out to different women and get their opinion, these issues. Um, so yeah, so that was like like a big challenge for me, and the door, it never opened to me. And the baithaks and Dharas, the market, the barber shop, these are male spaces, for instance, in the village. So, and I think I try to reflect that in my research. The and because I thought it was important to say that, clearly and honestly, rather than brushing it aside. So, um, so this is how I see, yeah. As I said, I try to highlight this in the research so that readers, for instance, understand, yeah, like the challenge I had. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I'm one sort of final question, I guess, and that's sort of looking beyond your fieldwork. And I don't know whether this is a
yeah,
village you're still in contact with, if you're still visiting, perhaps, or if you have a sense, perhaps, of what's happened since, because you also described, in the context of your fieldwork, two factions. One faction, being aligned with the government of the time, Imran Khan's period, and of course now that's very, very different. And the current Zardari administration, we have a very different sort of context. And I wonder how that's impacted then upon these sorts of intermediary actors,
yeah.
that you describe. How have things kind of reconfigured in the context of political change, in what has been in Pakistan, of course, quite rupturing and dramatic political change?
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for that question, Thomas. Yeah, it's something, and I'm working on this, by the way, what's happening right now, and using the same framework, for instance, and trying to understand how, Dhara Bandi reaches upward, for instance. So I'm focusing on that question at the moment, and how basically Dhara Bandi, and this framework connects the village to the district, to the district to the province, and the province to the nation. In the paper, I say that, to some extent, but the paper I'm working on at the moment, I want to basically explore, this side in in detail. Um, as I said before, each faction also has, its own national leader. I say that in the paper also. And and recently I was in Pakistan, and I was also, focusing on. Because when I was doing my PhD, the focus was very much, what's happening in the village. But right now, I'm focusing what's happening. For instance, as I said, each faction also has its own national leader, and that leader is not just. I mean, they have also a local leader, but at the same time, they also have a national leader, and the local leader in that context becomes a conduit, and that leader, the local leader, becomes a connection between the people in Bhi Nagar and the national leader, for instance, on the television screen in Lahore and in Islamabad. So and so I mean, Imran Khan, for instance, and then you have the other party, the Muslim League Nawaz, for instance, um, and how basically their charisma and how their message basically comes to the village. So I'm focusing on that question, and I was there, for instance, I could also give you an example. Think about how basically this actually works on the ground. Um, as we said, there are two factions in Bhi Nagar, and these factions are still there. So one side is, again, Fida Gujar is still there. His Dara is still there. He's still with Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. Of course, he's not, as active as he was, when I did the field work. And on the other side, Chaudhry Sulman, his party is in the government right now, and his Dara is basically, very much active because his party is in power right now. And recently I was there and I saw that, I think like my argument still holds, I would say, because these are not just election alignments. That's what I saw there. And I saw there like how basically, Dhara Bandi is basically, these are basically an entire worlds, uh, and entire frameworks through which basically, people were looking at the national politics, and how people basically see the national politics is seen and felt basically in the village. And those who were with Fida Gujar's faction, and they were watching Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf's friendly television channels, and they were hearing Imran Khan's speeches filtered through Fida Gujar's commentary. I mean, still there are speeches, there are still commentaries, there are still shows, and they discuss Imran Khan, and they discuss, the politics of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. and people understand national politics. For instance, those who are in the camp of Fida Gujar, they understand national politics through Fida Gujar's framing. Um, and those who were with Suleiman's faction, they would sit in his baithak, surrounded by Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz posters, and they hear Nawaz Sharif and Shahbaz Sharif through Suleiman's words, um, and they see the national politics through Suleiman's eyes. So this is what I noticed there: that same village, same day, two completely different versions of Pakistan being performed, being translated, being brought to life. And this is what I saw there, that it's the genius of Dhara Bandi as a system. Um, and that's why I say that Dhara Bandi just not organize village life. It organizes the villagers' entire relationship with the state, uh, with national politics, with national leaders, with national promises. Because everything is filtered through Dhara Bandi, through the local leader of your faction. And in the paper, Philip Abrams, for instance, a scholar I draw on in the paper, he thinks he talks about national leaders, the state, as hope generating machine, um, and national leaders and the state, he says, produce and sustain a sense of possibility, of promise, of a state that is present and invested in your welfare. But this hope generating machine, I argue in the paper, and the same thing I saw when I was in Pakistan recently, that it needs a local engineer, somehow someone who takes that hope, that national charisma, and makes it land in the everyday life of an ordinary person. And in Bhi Nagar, I saw that engineer is the faction leader. Um, and each faction leader does this work for his own Dhara. Fidar, was doing, when I was there, was doing for his people, and Suleiman was doing for his people. Um, and they do it in completely different ways, with completely different narratives, pointing to completely different promises. As even though Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, they are facing a lot of restrictions at the moment, but still, Fida Gujar, who's with Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, he was doing, for instance, he was still very much active on the ground. They were taking this abstract and making them concrete, for instance, on the ground. They were taking, something national and making them local. Making symbolic things, kind of, so that people could feel them. So that work, for instance, is still happening. Yeah, there are restrictions, there are challenges, so many challenges, but people are still doing that. Yeah.
Just one final sort of question, and
Yeah.
it was just something I was sort of thinking about there as we were talking about, the sort of shift in landscape, and I was wondering about then Fida Gujar's, kind of Dara in this context. If we were to go there today, would Imran Khan's photo still be hanging prominently on the wall?
Yeah. So I was there last year. I didn't see photos. You're right. But but his name is there. His people, yeah, for instance, yeah, they it's also a village, for instance, and their faction did a lot of things, and those things are still there. People still associate those things, for instance, with Imran Khan. This is how the politics works in Pakistan. Every work, every road, for instance, is associated with a figure, with a national figure, for instance. So those things are still, those material things are still there. So and the memories of Imran Khan are still fresh. His party is there. Yeah, they're trying to stay active. That's what I saw there when I was there. Yeah, of course, the others. In this again, we shouldn't forget that this area, and and the party won, the PTI won in this constituency, and their MPs and MNAs, for instance, they are in different parliaments. We shouldn't forget that, even though the government in Punjab is the government of Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, but in this constituency, the MPA and MNA, for instance, they belong to Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. So we shouldn't forget that factor as well. Even though the state basically is against them, but the political life, for instance, of the party, I would say, is pretty much alive, in the area.
Mudassar Munir, thank you so much for this really fascinating conversation. I've enjoyed a lot. It's been tremendously interesting. Thank you very much for being a part of the Contemporary South Asia podcast.
Thank you, Thomas, for this conversation. Thank you for all those questions, and thank you again, for the journal, for the editorial process, and for helping this paper find this shape. And also thank you generally to anyone listening to our conversation.
Thank you very much.